everybody, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Vynos Venture Engine. I'm Shrishruti Sriram, the Head of Marketing and Partnerships at Vynos. So just to give you a brief idea of what we do, Vynos is a technology platform for business intelligence and fundraising analytics for early stage startups and entrepreneurs. The webinar today is a part of a webinar series of our Clarity product. And if you would like to be notified about our upcoming events, please click the link that I will share in the chat panel. So before we begin, a quick reminder to please keep yourself muted so that there is no disturbance and everyone can hear the speaker clearly. So if you would like to keep your video on, please feel free to do so. Right now I have everybody on mute to avoid background noises that may distract you from listening to the webinar. Throughout the presentation, I will manage the chat functionality. You can enter your questions and comments in the chat box throughout the presentation, and we will address them at the end. So now that we're all set, we'll begin. The topic for today is startup challenges, managing investors and employees. In today's competitive world, startups cannot afford to slack, and they require all employees to be high performers. Entrepreneurs have to deal with a lot of practical challenges in creating a high-performance venture. Tarun Mehta will share his thoughts on a high-performance organization where employees share the same level of commitment and passion as that of the founders. Leveraging his experience of raising multiple funding, Tarun would also suggest measures that would reduce the conflict of interest between founders and investors and create a win-win relationship. So I'd now like to invite Tilay Rajan to introduce our speaker for today.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I think nothing gives a faculty member more pleasure than seeing a student of the institute doing extremely well. In that context, I think Tarun Mehta has been one of the very notable flag runners of IIT Madras. In a short span of time, they have really, he and his team have been really able to create a benchmark, and they have been able to set their goals extremely high, which is to manufacture the country's best electric vehicle. So I always thought, getting an electric vehicle and all of those things are only possible by the big companies. And I congratulate Tarun and his team to be able to kind of break that myth and really prove that it's possible if we really put our minds and act together. And I'm grateful that Tarun has spared the time to share his thoughts on some of the vexing issues that face early stage entrepreneurs, which is to ensure that keeping the employees motivated and continue to perform very well. And at the same time, most of the entrepreneurs need capital today, and how do we really manage the investors and run the ship in a very, very smooth fashion. So Tarun has been a student of IIT Madras, and subsequently he has gone on to win several laurels. Most notably, he was featured in the Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2018. Right. So without any further ado, let me hand over the session to Tarun. Over to you, Tarun.
Thank you, Professor. Just let me turn on the video also. Great, yeah. Okay, thank you for the kind introduction, Professor. And thanks for having me here. My pleasure. So what I thought I'll do is, I have a big presentation prepared, and honestly, I am not very good at, actually, I don't know. I don't think I'm very good at monologues. So I have a very small presentation just to sort of hold up what my thought process here. Mind if I share that, if I share my screen, Professor?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
So you could share your screen.
Great. Can you see the screen?
Yes, yes, yes. It's visible, right?
Okay, great. When we were discussing this, Professor had suggested these two topics of managing teams and managing investors, and I thought it might be useful to just sort of talk about what are the kind of, so okay, managing the team or managing the investors is there's no one thing that anybody can say. It really depends on the stage of the company. So the way I want to talk about both of them is depending on which stage of the company you are in, how you should look at how you should understand the team and how you should understand what kind of investors coming in. Before I go ahead, I don't know a lot about the participants. Maybe, Professor, if you could just give me a little bit of flavor of who the participants are. Are any of them entrepreneurs already? Are people looking at starting up? Are these people who have already joined startups? If I could just have a little bit of flavor, that will help.
Okay, I think this series that we have, it's essentially titled for entrepreneurs and by entrepreneurs, in the sense that entrepreneurs speak in this forum essentially for entrepreneurs. So most of the participants are entrepreneurs, and so they are not students, or they are not really working in large organizations. Some of them could be, but essentially they all have entrepreneurship on their horizon if they are not one already. So that's broadly the thing. I mean, we don't really have any particular scale of their operation. So some could be, just starting off. Some could be maybe a couple of years into their startup. But by and large, I think you can assume that the participants consist of entrepreneurs.
Sorry, that helps. Actually, so if people have started up, I think some of what I'm going to be talking about will probably resonate. And I really look forward to more questions. My presentation is short, it's just like 10 slides. So I really look forward to questions. Feel free to sort of throw in questions during the chat. I would love to take interruptions in the middle and go up on tangents and come back. Okay, so let me just start with the presentation. Okay, so first let's talk about the team. There are three things that I want to say first. First, just know that anybody who joins a startup, especially an early stage startup, is really buying into. I'm assuming most people here are looking at joining a startup, or looking at starting the startup. So most people who join, almost everybody who joins the early stage is really buying into your dream. So you are selling to them. And essentially, and you will realize as the years roll by, founders don't bring a lot to the table. Founders only bring in vision and passion. We initially think that, we'll be the CTOs, or we'll be the CEOs, or we'll be the CEOs. Turns out after a while that there are far better professionals whom you can hire to do all of those jobs. And the core thing that founders bring is the vision, the passion. And you're going to be hiring a team for pretty much everything else. Even if you are the CEO, you'll be basically hiring a kick-ass execution VP of like a CEO or a VP of Ops who will really take care of most of the actual operation execution for you. Even if you are the CTO, you will actually end up hiring a head of engineering, head of product, VP of engineering, who will really be much better at technology and engineering than you ever will be. So there's a lot of selling involved, and it really depends on which stage of the company you are in. So let's, by the way, this is what I'm going to be covering. So the role of salary, the role of different roles and responsibilities that you can give people, different incentives, whether it's variable payouts or success-based payouts, stock options, and work culture and work environment. How do these different things play a role in achieving a healthy team morale? Let me put it that way. So first, what are the challenges and opportunities as you build a team in a startup? Let's start at the very first stage, which is the super early stage, which is what in classic, and I'm going to be using fundraising nomenclatures for all of it, so because that sounds easy and what everybody uses. So early stage is basically the seed stage, or the started product comes pre-product market fit. Now this is likely the hardest time to hire as a startup. Why? Well, because you don't have any money. You don't have a big brand name investor like a Sequoia or a Tiger Global or a SoftBank backing you up. So it's not super easy to attract people. If you don't have money and you don't have big name investors, it's not easy, honestly, especially experienced professionals. And there's very little certainty in your company, right? Like if somebody joins you, they are not sure that if this thing does not work out a couple of years later, they'll be walking out with a strong resume. They could walk out, with practically no real experience, no technical experience, but better than joining a Cisco or better than joining a Google. And the compensation obviously is not going to be great if this thing does not turn out to be successful. So there are a lot of negatives at this stage. What are the positives? Well, you've got a super different vision. That's one of the first things about any startup, especially early stage, that what you are trying to do is very different You don't have a lot of competition. Not many people have thought of the business in that way. So the vision is very compelling, and for a lot of people, especially 4, 5, 6 year experience, that can make a big difference. That your vision is extremely exciting. So you have to focus a lot of time in selling that. No package. So every company, every startup, whichever sector you are in, eventually starts finding the ways of the world in that industry. So, for example, Ather can say whatever, but we can't ultimately run away from the fact that we are in the automotive industry, and there are a whole bunch of automotive norms that sort of come along with it. So there is a little bit of baggage that builds up over a period of time, but in super early stage, you can have no baggage. You can say audacious and frankly stupid things like, "Oh, we'll not have HR, we'll not have finance, right? We'll not worry about all of this stuff. We'll just build crazy good stuff." And a lot of it is really true. A lot of it will probably live over the period of time. So the early stage excitement, a lot of people really like it. You will find that a lot of people who join startups early stages and recurringly keep doing it actually like that early stage freedom. So that's one thing you've got to sell. And big stocks. You've got the opportunity to roll out some really juicy stock options, which if your company becomes worth a lot, like let's say $300-400 million, which is a lot in India, can basically become life-changing wealth for a lot of people. So that's early stage. Next is Series A. This, in my opinion, is the best time to hire great talent. Not all talent. I don't think you can hire everybody. This is not necessarily the best time to hire everybody, but some of the best talent in a startup typically joins it during the Series A stage. Why? So okay, first the negatives. You still don't have enough money. You have decentish money, but you're still likely asking people to take a little of salary cut. You're not going to be able to pay them as higher variable packs or a lot of the perks that their previous companies had. There's a lot of competition. So especially in the internet and the e-commerce world, especially the internet world, the minute a startup gets to a Series A stage, there's a lot of competition that comes around it. And all of it looks frankly very interesting. So there is a lot of competition. You're not offering enough money yet. There's still not enough certainty. You may have gotten some interesting VCs to back you by now, but realistically, it's not certain even now that this is a sure shot bet. So you can't guarantee somebody. You can't subconsciously guarantee somebody that, listen, if you join us, you're set, that you're fine, right? But the good things that are going for you, first, speed. So Series A is an interesting time when you still don't really have the baggage from the early stage. You still have a very different vision. And on top of it, you've gotten some serious capital, maybe 30, 40, 50 crores worth of capital. So you've got a ton of speed. So you've got the really early stage energy, and you've got a lot of money putting it on steroids. And most people can see that. So Series A funded startups are typically some of the fastest startups out there. Not early stage. Early stage startups usually not that fast because you don't have money. So that you can't really get the best talent. They can't really take a big space. They can't really invest enough in R&D. But Series A startups can do a lot of it enough to be very fast. That basically means it's a very talent. Not necessarily the best time to hire the best talent, but it's the easiest time to hire talent in general. Why? Because honestly, at this point, you don't have a lot of negatives. You have a fair bit of money. If you raise Series B, you've likely raised north of 100 crores. So you have adequate capital, unless you are doing something in the pharma industry or unless you're doing something in the automotive industry. Series B is adequate capital for most startups. So you have got a lot of money behind you, and you've got a huge momentum because you've raised Series A, you raised Series B, you're on momentum, right? Series C, and this is the crisis stage for almost every company. This is the place when it gets hardest to hire great talent. If Series A was the best time to hire great talent, Series C onwards is the hardest time to hire great talent. Why? Well, a lot of negatives pile on for any company by Series A timeline. By the way, these are like just broad stroke recommendations because this is what, and I saw it play out very, very, very similarly for Ather, honestly. So why Series A is hard? Because post Series C, something changes. Also, by the way, typically Series C for most startups seems to be the place, unless you're a SaaS company, for most startups, Series C is the stage when you are like north of 250, 300 people. And something happens when you cross the 250, 300 people barrier. You have what is the midlife crisis version of a startup really. There's a huge focus on profits and revenue and return on investment that kicks in because you're a Series C. You're no longer in the realm of doing something interesting, taking bold bets, unclear bets. You have to have a very clear business plan. Business plan is no longer an Excel sheet. They're going to be actually tracked quarter on quarter. And suddenly, it happens with almost every single startup, especially with first-time founders. Suddenly, founders realize that, holy shit, I've actually got a business to worry about. Not just cool technology or not just cool product. I actually have to convert all this into a real business by now. It's already late. You're supposed to realize this by Series C, but honestly, trust me, 90% of startups don't realize this. They realize it's only for Series C. So you have a huge amount of focus coming in there. And that focus, typically for most startups, is not fun. Unless you're an operations-based focused company, this stage certainly comes in like a cultural shock for most companies. And founders personally get hugely distracted because, from spending all the time with the engineering and the product teams, suddenly you're spending all your time with the finance teams or with the business finance guys or with the sales guys or with the marketing folks. And suddenly, all the folks that were there, that are there in the startup that joined until now, suddenly feel like, oh, aren't we like the most critical folks out here? And there's a general dip in culture that happens around this time. You've got a huge bunch of negatives stacked up against you. The one positive for you is that you've got stability of compensation. If you're very Series C, most likely than not, you kind of establish that, listen, we're not dying. Okay. Now, sure, maybe it could happen that our stock options may fluctuate up and down, but I don't think you have to worry about that. Yeah, other Series C funded startups to join here, so I don't know if the startup will go anywhere. It will go somewhere. It'll definitely find a home. It could become a rock star, multi-billion-dollar startup, but even the worst case, somebody will acquire it. Like, it's not going down to zero. So that's stability of compensation, and that's why it is a decent time to hire. But the best talent may not find it culturally very exciting, Series C onwards. And then you've got late stages, which is really Flipkart's or Zomato or Swiggy territory, which is when you're raising like $100 million every other quarter, which best you can. And you've got tons, you've got hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. You're really into the business. You're like 8-9 years into your life. At this point, you achieve a little bit of nirvana because you realize that hiring is essentially a process, and you're no longer worried about how do you hire across all levels. You've kind of settled enough that it's a process that works, and your only focus is hiring great leaders. And at that point, you don't have to worry about all these positives, negatives. It really boils down to how passionate your pitch is and how great leader you are as a founder. So late stage is very different from all of those stages. Now with that, let me just quickly talk through all stages. What are your cards to play as you are hiring and building a team? So early stage, your biggest card is honestly stocks and roles. Why? Because it's pretty much you've got nothing else. So you've got some very, very juicy stocks that you can roll out at this stage. And because you don't have any CXO or any VPs or any general managers, you can be generous with what kind of responsibilities you give out. So let's say if you are a SaaS startup, you can hire your first sales person and make him the head of sales. Right? It's very easy because there's nobody else. So hey, listen, you're the head of sales, you're the head of product. So the roles can be very juicy at this stage. If I were to give you some practical advice, depending on your startup, you may want to have anywhere between 7 to maybe 12% of your company stock kept aside for ESOPs at this stage. And in the first 2 years, you may want to roll out at least 5%, if not 10% of the company in actual stocks. So actually allocate that amount of stocks to early employees. Why 5% or why 10% and not lower? Lower than that, and you will soon find that people will do the math and they will realize that unless you become an Uber, this is not exciting. Why not higher? Well, there is a case for going higher, but I would caution against it in the first 2 years, because you will quickly realize that after 2, 3, 4 years, there's a lot of churn that happens. And while as a founder, you're not going to be leaving the startup anytime soon, probably never. a lot of the early joiners will, move on after 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And there's a lot of stock that will move along out with them. So you'll be forced to recycle a lot of stock again and again. So if you suddenly get very generous and let's say roll out 20% of your stock, 25% of your stocks in ESOPs, you may actually have a lot of your company not under your control and not even working for the company because they moved on to something else in life. So that's one of the reasons why you'll have to keep the total stock. My recommendation would be a total stock pool of 7 to 12%, out of which you allocate between 5 to 10% in the first 2 years. More than that might be a little too much, but again, there's no hard rules. Series A, well, the role of stocks and roles comes down a little bit because obviously company value has gone up from anywhere between 3 to maybe 5 times up. So the stock is no longer as valuable because the upside is reduced appropriately. And roles also, by the way, sorry, actually before this, one advice from my end on roles at an early stage. Though I said that you can hire the first sales guy and call him the head of sales, I would caution against being very generous with titles. There is a tendency among most startups to hire the first salesperson and give him the title of VP sales. The person is 26, and sure, you will feel like this, and I'm 26, and I'm calling myself the CEO. You are going to be going through a very different journey than the VP sales, honestly. For you, this is all in. For the VP sales, it's not all in yet, and the guy's 26. Once the company raises adequate capital, let's say you raise 50 crores in a year and a half, you will have enough capital to hire somebody who's like got 15 years of experience and is a rock star VP of sales, right? It would not be right for the company if you still say that, listen, but I have a VP sales who's now 28 and he's fantastic. Unless that person is actually fantastic, you will be forced to sort of do a serious demotion for that person and bring in somebody else. So my advice would be generous with the responsibilities that you would roll out at this stage, but be a little careful with the titles. Don't go overboard because almost everybody realizes after a couple of years, as the company gets adequate capital and can hire really phenomenal talent, not everybody will grow at the same pace, and you would have just set wrong expectations. So there's so many startups where there are like 5 employees and everybody's a CXO. You've set yourselves up for a big problem unless you believe that you will never grow beyond 10 employees. Many of those guys will not remain CXOs after 2 years. And nobody likes the demotion. Even founders don't like demotion. Employees definitely don't like demotion. So you want to be a little careful of the titles that you roll out at the early stage. Series A, as I said, stocks and roles come down a little bit because obviously the company is bigger now. But that gets replaced with a new thing called growth. By Series A, you have some fantastic growth. Unless you're in the hardware space, by now you can start showing some really, really strong growth. And a lot of people will join because of growth. The growth story is phenomenally exciting. People want to join a place which is growing, 5-10% every week, or maybe, doubling up every month. I think it's a phenomenal place to be in. So you've got the growth story, you've got to sell that. And you've got some cash. Typically in early stage, you're asking people to take 50, 60, 70, 80% salary cut. By Series A, you're probably doing more like 20, 30% salary cut, if at all. So cash is a decent story to offer, especially if people are looking at joining early stage companies. As a Series A funded startup, you're not too bad a choice from a cash perspective. So you should sell that story too. I'm sorry, forgot. Culture. Typically, this is almost rule of thumb. Series A startups seem to have the best culture. Why? Because all the boring things that come in with Series C that I talked about are not there yet, right? So this is the point when you have the best opportunity to define the culture. Culture could be, like everybody has work-life balance. Nobody works after 6. Culture can be that, we really focus on design. We will never deprioritize design. Culture can be that we really are awesome on communication. Like, everybody can go talk to everybody else. Everybody can ask founders an open question. Everybody knows how much cash we have in the bank. Culture will be whatever you will make it. And this is the time when you really want to sort of start focusing on it. And this is also the time when most people start noticing it. So there's a lot of word of mouth, especially if you're in startup hubs like Bangalore, Chennai, Delhi, Gurgaon especially. There's a lot of word of mouth. And if you're focusing on culture, which you likely will be at Series A stage, a lot of people will hear about it. So you should focus on this a lot more in attracting talent in your company at this stage. Moving on, Series B, the role of stocks and roles comes down even further because your startup by now has at least 10x in valuation from your early stages. So again, that has come down even more. Growth is a big story by now because if you're a Series B funded startup, likely your growth story is still running extremely strong, riding on from Series A. So you should sell growth again. Cash actually becomes an interesting story because the Series B, most startups start offering market salary. So you're offering good cash. You're also likely in some really intense market, which will likely mean that you will also be starting to layer in things like variable payouts, success-based earnouts, or like a lot of additional cash payouts beyond just the basic fixed pay. So those are going to be great stories for you, and you're going to be talking a lot about them. And this is what people will also start noticing more and more about the company at that stage. So you should focus on this. And a new thing starts popping up by Series B. The fact that you're that you're joining a Series B startup, and if you stay in the startup for at least, let's say, 2 years, actually becomes a good resume point. Why? Because a Series B funded startup, okay, most startups are doing something new. So if you were to join a startup, you are likely picking up a new skill, or at least a skill in a new sector. Now that's resume worthy. But if you join the startup at a super early stage and the startup tanks, let's say Series A or seed, and if the startup never goes beyond that and dies, it'll be hard for you to convince, it'll be hard for an employee to convince a new employer that this was some valuable skill that I learned in a couple of years at a startup that went nowhere. But by Series B, there is general awareness that, listen, this company did something cool. So if you work as a Series B funded startup, you can put that as a legitimate resume point, and that's valuable. So what I mean by this is, as a founder, you want to be selling this point in a significant way by Series B. So listen, if you work here, you're not saying it explicitly, but figure out how to sell this. But essentially, what your implied point will be that, listen, your resume is going to look great. Like, this is going to be a good story for you. You want to talk about, you want to join us. That's Series B. Series C. Sorry. Series C. Stocks, roles, even further diminished value by now. Growth is still okay for you, I would say. Cash is a big piece in your conversation. And resume becomes a big piece now, right? Because a Series C funded startup, almost certain that it's going to look good on the resume if the person stays in for a while. So you want to be selling this more. Quick pointers on some numbers here. After the first seed early stage, you want to keep refreshing your ESOP pool by anywhere between 1 to 2% on an annual basis, because that's not how you will be spending on an annual basis attracting new talent. The numbers will keep coming down. So let's say in the year 2, you replenish it by 2%. In year 3, you will do it 1.5. Year 4, you will do 1%. Year 5 onwards, you will do probably an annual refresh of 0.75% or something like that. So, but keep planning for the additional refresh. You will likely need it to keep attracting enough talent. Cash-wise, for Series B, you're offering market salaries 100%. Series C, you've got enough competition that you're likely overpaying everybody in most industries. So by Series C onwards, you're likely paying better than where the market is. So just a quick rule of thumb in my experience. Okay, now let me just take a pause here before I go on. Actually, this is my entire section around attracting employees. As I said, I wanted to basically talk about these factors. I just took all of us through these factors through the life of the startup: culture, stock options, incentives, roles, and salaries. Any questions at this point? Otherwise, I'll move on to investors.
Hey Tarun, so this is Deepak Karthikeyan here. Start a quick question. Yeah. Hey, so you initially started with saying what is the actual role of founder will be in the initial stage, and then as moving on. So what will be the founder's role throughout? Like there will be certain specific roles a founder will be playing, right? And the one that you called out was selling the vision and the dream and the passion. Apart from that, what else will be the founder's role?
So, okay, I think one characteristic that I have found common between most successful founders is that, okay, first thing, if you're growing fast enough, there's no way you will be able to have a stable job description as a founder. It's impossible. You can't keep one. Maybe in 1 year, your entire focus is just hiring. You're reading tons of books on HR. You're reading tons of books on work culture. You're spending tons of time architecting the communication in the organization, setting up different meeting formats. You're doing a lot there, and you're hiring really phenomenal HR talent to help you structure all of it. Next year, all you're focused on is the product, because the product is falling behind, and you're certainly hiring some phenomenal product managers, and you're spending a lot of time figuring out how to set up a very competent product organization. Year 4, all you're doing is basically maybe spending time in sales, and you're out on the road half of the time. You're meeting new customers. You're turning up in conferences. You're giving talks because visibility matters. So one common thing for most successful founders is that they don't get a stable job description, which means the common trait is an extreme flexible mind. A lot of founders get stuck because they see themselves as, let's say, engineers, and they are very adamant that, listen, I'm an engineer, I want to be head of engineering. But listen, like, you are 22 when you started the startup. There's no way you're going to be the most competent engineer 10 years out or even 5 years out. There are far better competent engineers or VP engineering that the company can hire. So if the founder becomes too rigid, that no, I'm an engineer, I want to be an engineer, you are making a life difficult. You're setting yourself up for failure. So you've got to be extremely flexible.
Got it.
And if I would directly answer, I would say the job of a founder is to constantly, if every job in a startup you can be replaced by a more competent professional, then the only job of the founder is to remember the vision, because no professional that you hire from outside can understand the vision and then run the company. You are responsible for the vision, and the only of the founder that never goes away is to make sure that the company can 10x itself every few years. And that likely means taking a company in a direction that is completely out of ordinary course of business. So you will have this suite articles of association and MOM, memoranda of association, all of that written, which will write down in very clear terms, this is the business of the company. And what you realize as founders is that every 3, 4, 5 years, that has to be completely scratched out and rewritten. No CEO, no CTO, no COO that you ever hire can go and change that, right? As a founder, you can change it. And that's your only job, to know which new direction my company has to go in. Like you had a fantastic business running, I don't know, offering SMS-based services 5 years back. Nobody wants SMS-based services. You've got to pivot to a very different model. That's what a founder is really supposed to.
Got it. Thanks, Tarun. That was very helpful. And at what stage does the founder hunt for investors and play that role of getting money into the company?
Does
it happen earlier? Like is that the first thing that starts happening? Because I know you touched upon first year he goes around doing design, second year he goes around doing engineering. But at what stage does the founder actually hunt for investors or go around seeing where he can pull the money for the company?
It depends on what you're chasing. So, first there are some startups that just need money right off day one, and they can't be bootstrapped maybe beyond the first few months. In which case, as a founder, you will be practically raising money for several years, and that'll be like, if you're a CEO founder, that'll be like at least 50% of your job description, if not more. Companies can be bootstrapped, especially SaaS companies can be bootstrapped for a very long time, possibly forever. In cases where you can bootstrap, you've got a choice, and that's the choice that you've got to make as founder. Fundraising is not bad. Fundraising essentially allows you to fast track whatever vision you have, but you will be giving up control in one way or another. So it's a choice that you've got to make. If you're extremely paranoid about control and you don't like the idea of investors, my advice would be bootstrapped forever, and never raise more than, let's say, never give investors more than 25% in your company totally. If that's not something you're worried about, then you're probably fundraising right from the first few months itself, and you will dilute yourself down to something like maybe 10% of ownership in your own company. So these are really polar opposites. And you got to figure out, nobody can decide this for you. You got to figure out how comfortable you are with investors, whether you like the idea or you find them not good partners.
Got it. Yeah. Yep. Thanks, Tarun. That was helpful.
Hello, Tarun, Karan here.
Hi, Karan.
Hi. So I have a doubt, especially when it comes to deep tech startup like yours was an electric mobility. Raising your first fund is always very difficult. So
Raising a first round, you mean?
Yeah.
Hmm.
So we need some more. We need suggestions raising first round. How we can go about it?
Okay, so if you're doing something deep tech or something hardware, one thing that you've got to understand is that investors don't understand it because investors are used to seeing the internet world where the feedback between giving money and the money producing some output is a very short one. Okay, so typically, let's say you set up a SaaS is also not a good example because even SaaS takes a few years to build a product. Let's say you are doing, okay, easy example. If you were 5 years back and you were setting up a startup to do food delivery, you would raise money. Let's say you will raise $3 million, and within 2 months you will start showing phenomenal growth. And investors don't need to see margins. Investors don't need to see profits for the first couple of years, first few years actually. But they need to see more and more users coming in, more and more app installs, more and more transactions in our GMV happen. Now, 99% of the investor world is used to sort of looking at your business model with looking at that business model. And even the handful of investors that say that they understand hardware don't actually understand business. So if you're doing deep tech or doing hardware, the first thing that you need to understand is that the odds are against you because people don't understand your business model. So what can you do? My advice would be, don't try and compete on that metric. Don't try and worry about showing customers. Don't try and worry about revenue. Don't try about showing margins or business models. They will just take you down. Like if an investor tells you, listen, but I want to see a business plan. Let's say you're building a vertical takeoff machine. It's going to take several years to build. Let's say an investor tells you, hey, but I want to see a business plan first. Bullshit. Like, don't spend any time doing that. Because if an investor wants to see business plan for a vertical takeoff startup, the investor is smoking something. There's no way a sensible business plan, which is not absolute BS, can be written in the first month of that startup or the first year of that startup. So avoid conversations with investors who want to see a business model too early because you're not going to have a good one. And even if you put up a business model, you will quickly realize that there is poking holes in it. Hey, but you're not accounted for rent of your factory right now. You've not accounted for any churn that you will have in customers in year X. You don't want to discuss those. What you want to do is, if you are, let's say, doing hardware, I'm not super sure about deep tech in general, but hardware, you want to spend every single second and every single dime that you have in basically churning out a better product. Define your success in your own terms, in terms that you control. Don't let investors define that in metrics that you don't control. And what you control is the quality of your product or your technology. So define right now that, listen, for me, success is going to be delivering this kind of a product in month X, delivering this kind of a capability by month 18, by showing this kind of a capability and filing X number of patents by year, let's say 2.5, right? And if I do this, then this is how far ahead I will be of every other startup in this space, which will then convert into some kind of a business lead over everybody else. And there's a huge pot of gold waiting for us at the end of this thing. But first thing is, take charge of the conversation. Define your metrics first, depending on what technology or product you're working on. Don't let investors define it. And if your thing takes too many years to fruition, you are looking not at VCs, but you're looking at individual investors. Individual investors come in all brackets. They come in as angel investors, they come in as VC investors, and they come in as P investors. But what I'm separating is, most VC investors operate by committee. You are looking for VC investors that do not operate by committee, where one man's decision ultimately prevails. You want to find that one man and you want to impress the heck out of that one person. Because honestly, at something that's going to take, let's say, 4 years before first revenue, any committee will poke in a hole and your plan is going to look and sound stupid. You want to impress one guy by the audacity of your vision so much that the person says, holy shit, this is great. I want to put all my money behind this one idea. Right? So if your time to fruition is really long, find not committees but individuals and define your own metrics. That's all I can say.
Okay, one more connected question. Is there any better way to find these relevant investors other than hit and trial? Because that wastes a lot of time and energy.
Yeah, there's not. Typically, I've seen that in the early stages, you will have to do anywhere between 60 to 80 meetings to find one success. As the stages go by, that number will come down, but doesn't seem to come below 40 actual meetings at any stage. So unless you've done like north of 80 or 100 meetings, I would say just keep at it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Taran.
Yeah. Okay. If there are no other questions, then I'll just go. I don't have too many slides on investors, so I'll just go to the section. Okay, investors. So first, I think we really need to know the various types of investors are out there. There is the angel investor. These are folks who come in super early. Typically, they are putting in checks less than $100,000. There are seed investors. There are micro VCs or super angels. They typically put in checks of usually less than $1 million. These days, check sizes have increased a little bit, so it could be $2 million, but typically it's about $1 million. Then the financial investors, they are typically VCs, which is Series A, B, maybe sometimes C. They're typically $30 million or lesser check sizes. Then the late stage financials, typically PE firms like the KKRs and the Westbridges of the world and Goldman Sachs and all these guys. They will typically not for anything less than $50 million check sizes, individual investments. Then there are strategic investors. Strategic investors can come in anytime. They can come in, they will not come in typically angel or seed stage, but they can come in Series A onwards at any point. Strategic investors can be strategic because they could be relevant channel partners, or they could be in a similar space to you. They could be your suppliers, they could be your customers, and they see value in what you're doing and they want to come in early. And then there are competitive strategies. They are like the biggest strategics out there. They will typically not come in at Series A. They may come in Series B, but typically later. So Series B onward. And for both kind of strategic investors, dollar sizes, they're completely flexible. You will find strategics putting in as little as $1 million. So strategics will put in like $1 billion also. So it's a fairly flexible bracket called strategics. Who are they? So angels are the dreamers. And really what you're selling to an angel investor is your dream and your passion. Nothing else. Like often you will meet angel investors who will invest in a company. They don't even know what the company is doing. But because they meet the founders and they're so incredibly excited, so this is the best time to be an excellent storyteller. If you're bringing an angel investor in, you've got to be a fantastic storyteller. Like, or the better the storyteller you are, the better the angel investors you will get. Seed stage is believe in the founders, believe in the capability of the founders. Similar to angel, but a little bit more balanced, not completely dramatic. Financials, they are less about people and they're more about opportunities. So like a typical VC is investing more in the opportunity. So right now, like for example, after the China apps ban, financial investors are saying, listen, there's a big opportunity to build in similar apps to TikTok or India. So they're excited about the opportunity, and the one who comes up with a better plan to them, they will invest, right? Late stage financials, they are actually fairly disconnected from people and opportunity and sectors. They're investing in projections, right? You can be you can be a paints company, right? You can be Asian Paints, and a PE investor will invest in an Asian Paint if they believe that your projections are just beautiful and they make sense. That you are going to have like absolutely dominating market presence, you're going to have phenomenal margins. You could be a dairy company, or you could be like freaking the most advanced AI company out there. They're reasonably ambivalent. Like, sure, will we put money behind a new GPT-3 company? Yeah, we will. Will we put money behind Amul? Yeah, we will. So the late stage financials are really putting in money on projections. Strategics, they are investing in the sector, and competitive strategics, they're really investing. They really believe in the channel that you have. So let's say you are a new direct-to-consumer brand like Beardo, right? Or any one of these healthcare startups, not healthcare, like wellness startups. and you are selling to customers directly over Instagram. And let's say Nestle finds you, or not Nestle, let's say P&G finds you, and P&G really likes your approach, right? They also have competing products, but they know that, listen, there's no way P&G will be able to sell to consumers over Instagram. But you as a startup seem to be figuring it out. So they will invest in you. Or they could be investing in you because you are building using a technology stack that's very different and very valuable that the incumbent does not understand. So the incumbent wants to invest in you. Now, in these guys, there are a bunch of questions that Professor wrote to me that I should discuss with you guys on investors. How do you align with all your investors? And you will probably have a mix of all of these investors as you continue building the startup. What's the role of a board? How much management control do you need as a founder? Valuation, how do you control different entry prices for different investors? Because they are very different, even at the same stage for different investors. Do you do strategic tie-ups? What about exits? How do investors get different exits? And terms, finally. What's founder friendly? What's employee friendly? What's company friendly? Different things. So, by the way, in the interest of time, I'm going to do a very quick summary of all these points, and I'll take more questions after that. So, how do you align with everybody? Well, you can't. I think it'll be a mistake on your part if you believe that your interest as a founder is 100% aligned with any of your investors' interests. Almost never. Okay. Because typically the first place where it starts diverging is that almost every investor comes in with, apart from competitive strategics, almost every other investor has a time horizon. Like they may want to exit in 3 years, they may want to exit in 5 years, they may want to exit in 9 years. But you can bet every single dollar that you have, every single rupee that you have, that they want to exit. And as a promoter, you may never want to exit, right? Or you may want to exit faster than even them. So it's unlikely that your interest will be 100% aligned with them. And starting from this exit conversation, I think there are like a million clauses that emerge: drag along, tag along, pro rata participation, preferential terms. I think all of them ultimately stem from the same divergence on when should a company give an exit. When is an exit feasible? And are you building? You're not just a promoter; you're also the management of the company. Are you building the company aligned with the exit horizon which works for the investor? So first, be aware that your interests are not directly aligned with any of your investors. What you have to do is find creative solutions to ensure you can accommodate everybody's interest. And this goes back to the point that I said. If you don't think you can accommodate people, don't take money. But if you're taking money, what you're saying is that, listen, my interests are different from yours. I don't want to run this company for 30 years. You want to exit in 5 years. But that's fine. I'll find a way to accommodate your interest on the cap table. Okay. How? So let's say the VC is investing in you. Typically, a VC in India will probably stay calm for 6-7 years, but around 6-7 years, they will start looking for an exit. You may have a much different exit horizon. You may not want to IPO in 6 years. You may not want to sell the company in 6 years. You may never want to sell the company. What you will have to first do is be aware of every investor that's coming in, write out the exit horizon, and do a few things to make sure that you give the investor enough comfort that they will find the exit in that time period at a healthy enough multiple, right? So let's say if a VC is coming in, and the VC is looking for an exit in 6 years. What you need to start doing is you need to draw up a business plan that allows the VC that either allows you to IPO in 6 years, which does not mean that you need to exit, that the investor can exit, or you agree to sell the company. If you can't agree to that, or an IPO, then draw up a roadmap where, let's say, a strategic investor can come in and buy out the stake of this financial investor in a few years, right? And give them a healthy return. Or you agree to bring in a late stage financial investor like a KKR or a Blackstone and have them buy out your existing investor. And that's something you're okay with, right? Many founders will say that, listen, I'm not comfortable with a Blackstone owning 30% or 40% of my company. But if you can't do an IPO and you don't want to sell the company and you don't want the Blackstone to buy enough stake in your company, how will the financial investor exit, right? So just being aware of different exit horizons and being accommodative of it and giving out enough signals to your investors that, listen, I will find you an exit, don't worry. And your exit will be at a very healthy multiple and I'm working towards that. Here is the roadmap that will get you there. Just being aware of this and having those conversations will probably be enough alignment for every investor to be comfortable with you in a management role. Next topic, role of board and how much management control do you need? Again, it's a very founder dependent topic, but generally most founders want to be conserving all the management control with them. Now, if you bring in large financial investors, that's not easy because most large financial investors will not give you enough management control. They will have a veto on every single thing out there. Like they will have a veto on every single CX that you will have. They will have a veto on every single purchase decision. They will have a veto on every time you raise money. They will have a veto on whether you can IPO or not. Your life will be fairly restricted. Now, if everybody's interests are aligned, the restriction will not be visible. But if the interests are not aligned, they will have control over you. On the other hand, a strategic investor will typically give you a lot of latitude on management control. Strategic investor will be very happy. Listen, you run the company, right? But here are these strategic tie-ups that we need to agree on, right? You guys do this business incredibly well on Instagram. Can you build out a channel for Nestle to also do this or P&G to also do this in partnership with your startup, right? As long as you solve this strategic agenda for us, we are completely comfortable with whatever you will make, whoever you will hire, जिससे भी पैसा raise करना है, जो करना है करो. But and you run the company however you want to run the company. You want to have bean bags. You want to basically have a fancy 5-star for your accommodation habit. We don't care. But solve our strategic agenda without the company going. So do it to a very different spectrum. Depending on your comfort, select the right investor. If you are extremely finicky about management control, don't bring in large financial investors. If what you want is extremely fast growth and you want to be competing with everybody, then don't bring in a strategic investor, bring in financial investors, they will be aligned with you. Kind of what happened with Flipkart, for example. You will do it really fast, but you may not be in charge of your own company at the end of it. Role of board, kind of same way. Financial investors will want a lot of board seats because a lot of decisions happen at the board level. So really, board and management are not that dealing as one would imagine. Valuation, typical rule of thumb, strategics will pay the highest price, financials will pay the lowest price. And that's how you want to fundraise, which is why you want to bring in strategics a little later. You don't want to bring in strategics very early. Financials you can bring in early enough. And actually, I think I'm pretty much out of time. Let me just stop here. Any questions on this? I'll happy to take them now.
Hello, I'm Rudran.
Sorry, Rudran. We also have a few questions in the chat box. So,
oh, is that? Sorry, I didn't notice.
Yeah, we'll address those after Rudran's question.
Okay.
Yeah, hi Tarun. In your case, you have built an electric vehicle. For that prototype, you might require a lot of money initially. How did you manage that funding? How did you raise that fund?
So in our case, following my own advice, in the early stages, we went behind individual investors. So we went Sachin and Vinny Bansal were our first angel investors. Before that, we had the true angel investor, one of the alumnus from IIT Madras. We basically hung around the campus enough that we managed to find an alumnus who had some money in their pocket. And we managed to convince them, listen, we are super excited young entrepreneurs who will basically build a Tesla in India. And we got $50,000 from them. With that, we ran for 1 year and we managed to find Sachin Vinny Bansal, who again believed in the same vision and gave us $1 million. After that, for our Series A, we basically went to Tiger. We didn't go to a standard VC firm because, as I said, since our period of launch was really long, it was not easy to convince any committee VC. So we had to go after VCs where an individual would make a decision. And in that case, Tiger is one of those VCs where an individual makes a decision and it's not a massive committee weighing in and writing complex business scenarios. They're basically taking a punt. So we went with Tiger and Tiger put in $1 million. And after that, instead of going to more financial investors, we just straight away went to strategic because we knew that we have technology that we're building, which is very valuable. And a lot of strategic investors, competitive strategic investors, would want access to that technology. So might as well take money from them because we don't have enough metrics to show. We don't have revenue, we don't have customers, we don't have margins. How will we bring in more financial investors? So we went into the strategic investor and we took money from strategic. So we raised $30 million from Hero. Then, because business was still very young, we went in again with an individual investor. We had Sachin Bansal invest $30 million again. And then we've had a couple of rounds after that where between Sachin and our strategic investor Hero, we've raised a few more dollars.
Tarun, hi.
Hello.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Ather and big fan of your work. I've been trying to connect with you. I'm Nilesh. I'm from Calamus. We make electric bike, the world's safest electric bikes.
So you make what?
We make the world's safest and most advanced e-bikes.
Oh, you're making electric bikes?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. What's your startup name?
I am Nilesh, calamusbikes.com.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so basically I don't want to ask you a generic question. My question to you is, when you just had technology and when you started out, how did you get these investors on board? Because we've been trying to do that for the past 3 years. We already have pre-order revenue of about $0.6 million. And it's still difficult to rope in investors, especially in India. And because we're an Indian company, it's difficult to get investors from outside. What are your 2 cents on this?
So as an Indian company, you will have extreme trouble attracting investors from outside India. Investors who don't have a base in India are unlikely to invest in you unless your customers are all based in like a US or an Israel or Singapore. And in your case, they clearly aren't. So you'll find it extremely hard to attract foreign investors. Axel, Sequoia, they're all fine. They have Indian bases, but others not so much. So yeah, reach out to people, cold mail. Like in our case, we cold mailed Sachin Mansal. We literally like Sachin@flipkart.com took a punt and sent a cold mail, and it worked. Like I sent a whole bunch of cold mails out, and Sachin responded, which got me enough time. Now, once you get time with a cold mail like this or a cold introduction, if you can't get a warm introduction, focus a lot of your time in basically selling a very compelling long-term vision. Don't focus on just the product. In the pitch, focus a lot on a super long-term vision. You've got to attract individual investors with a very, 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 very compelling vision. Don't talk about what's your plan. Don't talk a lot about what's your plan, about your immediate product. Talk about why. Talk about the why, really. Talk really about the why. Talk a lot about the vision. That's what we've seen has worked for a lot of startups. In the Indian market, now that Ather has raised some money, one challenge that you have is just showing pre-orders alone won't actually work. It didn't really work for us, by the way. Just showing pre-orders doesn't seem to ever work actually. And one challenge that you have is when we were honestly pitching, we were naive enough to think that in 18 months we could get to market, and with $3, $4, $5 million is adequate capital to get to market. One challenge that I've seen a lot of startups in the EV space now struggle with this in India is that if they go out and say that, listen, I'm raising $5 million and $5 million I'll be in production, nobody believes them, because Ather has spent close to $100 million to get to production. So sure, Ather might have been wasteful, Ather could have been not prudent, but are you going to be that efficient? Are you going to be like getting to market with $5 million? And if you do get to market with $5 million, then maybe you're not going to be building enough technology. So I'm not saying $5 million is wrong. All I'm saying is just be aware of the market dynamics, because some of us have raised money, so we have set a precedent, and people are looking at our numbers and judging new incoming players. So you have to counter. If you let's say if you are raising $5 million, and if you believe you can get to production with that, you have to really first counter why that is good enough, despite Ather not being able to do it. Or you have to tell a new story, or you have to be able to sell that, listen, we'll not get to production with $5 million, but $5 million is great to get to this one milestone, and that one milestone is a fantastic measure of success. So as I said, first define your metrics, take control of the conversation. Otherwise, investors are going to be clubbing you with metrics that they understand. And if they're seeing Ather, they are looking at Ather's metrics and are trying to project those on you. Say, hey, if Ather needed X million dollars to get to this, how much will you need? So you don't want to be straitjacketed in that conversation.
Got it. I have some more technology and manufacturing related questions, but I'm not sure if this is the right section to ask those questions.
We could take them offline.
Should I go ahead?
For anybody here, if you want, I'll just type my email ID in chat. Feel free to drop me a message. My response times might be a little iffy, but I'll get back.
Awesome, as long as you respond.
Yeah.
Hello, Tarun. Karan here again.
Hi, Karan.
Hi. So another my question is, how important is it to have critics in board to avoid blind spots?
Yeah, board composition is tricky. Like I don't think I can claim a lot of gyan here because Acer ka board has been very tiny. Like as of now, despite a Series C funded startup, we only have 3 board members, 2 promoters and 1 investor. So our board is extremely small. So I don't have a lot of gyan. I want to say a few things, but honestly, I think I could be misguiding people because of the poor experience that we have. So I just pass on that question.
Okay, one more question I have. In this EV space, how can you strategize differentiating in this red ocean? A sustainable differentiator that no one can easily disrupt. How, any tips on that?
Yeah, anything can be disrupted. Anything will get copied. That's 100%. I think what you want to be chasing is something new. Let me describe it with an analogy. All incumbents are typically, like, you can imagine incumbents as, having built their own forts on top of a very nice hill. And the hills are the strategic advantages that they have. So let's say something like Hero has the advantage of distribution. Bajaj has the advantage of branding. TVS has some advantage. Honda has the advantage of quality. So they have built their own businesses as a huge enterprise on top of their own differentiation, right? Now, you don't want to talk about any parameter that is similar to an existing incumbent. So, for example, we don't talk about quality. Honestly, we don't. Like, it's not like a quality is extremely bad, but there's no point of talking quality in the automotive industry because everybody is better than you. There's no point of talking about marketing budgets because everybody's going to be better than you. There's no point of talking about distribution because everybody's better than you. There's no point of talking about capacity or manufacturing or distribution or sales or channels or any of this, right? You've got to basically go after something completely different. Actually, part of the reason why we focused a lot on the smartness of the vehicle and the extremely high performance in the first few years is because we realized that nobody else is talking about it. It doesn't matter. Like, that may not get us 1 lakh customers. I just want to find a few years worth of differentiation when others are not talking about it. So the first few years when nobody was talking about a really powerful motor, we started talking about really high acceleration. Then as people started catching up onto it, we started talking a lot about connectivity and software. As people start catching on to this, we'll start talking about something else. So you will look at if you have a product, look at the spec sheet of a similar product by competition and remove every single spec that competition talks about. Every single spec, just strike it out. You can't talk about the same thing. Now talk about what is the new thing that you can bring in. That's an easy rule of thumb to try and find a unique differentiation.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tarun.
Any other questions?
So there are a few questions in the chat panel. So probably I can.
Sure. I'll just take them 1 minute. So we are a corporate fund. We are a corporate fund provider. In the meantime, many are coming to us for startup funding. Your company can help them. Sorry, I don't think I got this question, but I'll just go to the next one. Syed, can you just re-clarify on chat what your question was? I'll validate the other question. Why should from Cosper, why should inculcating work culture wait till Series A and not early stage? Early stage is the best time to inculcate culture and retain employees, especially when they're the ones who are buying the idea. You're right, except that you will not have a lot of bandwidth and time to really bring out the culture that you have in your mind in the early stages. So early stages are just so much, practically, early stages are so much bootstrapping and so much just surviving that spending time and talking about a culture takes a backseat. It's a good time to talk about it. It's a good time to bring it out, but it may not be, you may not just find enough time. That's why I said Series A just opens up enough budget and time for you to start focusing on it. Seed stage, while the ideas will be there, the team will be so small and your budgets will be so puny that you will not be able to really talk about this. You'll not get enough time. Like, you'll be just caught up in existential challenges. Next question from Naveen. Hey Tarun, what do you think will be the forecast for post-COVID era in near term for all business industry startups? Yeah, sorry, actually there's no one recommendation for all businesses. It really depends on your industry. Naveen, if you could clarify which industry you're talking about, probably I may have some more specific view here. From Kaustav again, How important is it to have a co-founding team? In that case, we have to align the vision and even put out the fiction at every stage. Is it worth or is it better to walk alone? What are the advantages and disadvantages? I actually think it's a fantastic idea to have at least one co-founder. I'm not sure if it makes sense to have multiple co-founders. But it's great. A lot of successful companies have multiple co-founders, but it's hard because of the problem that you just said, cautious. That you have to align too much. But I think having at least one co-founder is a good idea because it allows you to sort of do some reality checks. Often as promoters, often as founders, there's a tendency in founders to basically drink their own Kool-Aid and just be ridiculously optimistic without accounting for the reality. Two co-founders can become good reality checks for each other and play a good balance. Also, you will notice a lot of investors only invest in a two-founder startup because for them that's a good signal that listen, if you can explain your idea to at least one guy, if you can convince and if you can accommodate another person in your vision, only then can you accommodate more people. If you are so close-minded that you couldn't even attract one more co-founder, the chances are high that you may not be able to accommodate us also. Now, having said that, there is a Facebook against all examples, right? One Mark Zuckerberg pretty much carried the entire business. But then, Mark Zuckerberg actually didn't listen to any of his investors. Mark Zuckerberg was pretty much solo. So if Mark Zuckerberg was wrong, all the money in the company would have gone down in the drain. So it's a little bit of a long shot if you're a single founder. It could be worth a lot, it could be worth nothing. That's why everybody looks for at least one more co-founder. There are advantages when the going gets tough. Having one co-founder, the psychological support that provides you is just phenomenal.
Sure. Thank you.
Couple of questions.
Sorry.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So one is regarding manufacturing. Why do you choose to manufacture in India? My thinking is it's because of the Indian market that you were serving primarily. But what were the challenges you faced manufacturing in India? Because even for us, that's a big challenge. A lot of the technology or the skill set, etc., are not available, and you require a lot of.
Who's the speaker? I can't see your name. Okay, Nilesh. Okay.
Yeah.
So Callum's bike. Got it. So yeah, why India? Because India honestly has the cheapest manufacturing in the entire region. I don't think we know of any place, including even China, is more expensive than India for two-wheelers. So India is honestly the cheapest, not just labor but also conversion cost. So we're the cheapest manufacturing probably globally for two-wheelers with this quality. Also, supply chain is extremely robust in India. Like for anything, you will find a million suppliers. So it's extremely robust. What are the challenges? The challenges are that without adequate capital, none of the suppliers will talk to you. So if you want to talk to like an MRF, or you want to talk to a Gabriel, or you want to talk to a Brembo, you want to be able to tell them that, listen, I have 10, 12, 15, $20 million that I've raised. So I'm a legitimate company, right? You want to spend some time talking. Otherwise, the risk is that unlike China, the India market is not very fragmented. So they're not like 100 suppliers of suspension. They're probably like 10. And if they don't think that you're very credible or you're sure to get to market, they may not work with you. So the entry barrier is a little high because of that. But if you can cross the entry barrier, there's no place like India to manufacture.
Hi, sorry to interrupt. I think we're short on time right now. And I know that we've not answered a lot of questions, but probably you can just drop them here and I'll make sure that we'll get back to you with the responses. Nilesh, I think you have a few
Thanks. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for this webinar.
Hey, nice to meet you, Nilesh. Okay, so I'm just taking more questions. Naveen Kumar, I was mentioning the business of IT sectors and manufacturing sectors.
So,
Naveen, I didn't catch. What was the original question? Oh, okay. COVID impact. No, even in IT, honestly, like that. Okay, so I'll take a stab at it. So I think in the manufacturing sector, well, manufacturing sector is huge, guys. Man. So let's say in automotive, the closer you are to a lower price product, so you either want to be very cheap or you want to be very expensive. I think the middle is where it's very hard to find customers after COVID. But I personally think this is all a setback for only 9 to 12 months. I think by the end of this year, we will likely be already back to normal and we'll probably have a very fast recovery. So my personal view is that this will likely be behind us by January. Yeah. Okay, Malvia has a question. Which one is better to start? So I think in your first question, Malvia, if you can re-clarify. Your second question is, what is the importance of patent in starting phase? Nothing. I don't think IP plays any real role unless you are inventing something radically new that is completely going to change the world. Patents have very little role in the early stages. Like they have some role in the late stages as you get to market, but from a valuation and a fundraise perspective, they have very limited, almost no value.
Tarun, I think we're short on time right now.
Yeah. I think this was great. Thanks for having me over. I hope I answered some of your questions to some satisfaction. I've left my email ID there. I could run behind on replying to mails, but I'll make sure that I respond to everybody. And I wish everybody all the best.
Thanks, Tarun. Thanks.
Right. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.